This is 100 Years of Cocks. You are listening to a podcast by Frances Thompson. 10 Machel Cox siblings, born at the end of the 1800s, who wrote to each other for decades, covering a fascinating variety of topics. The older family are Enid, Edmund, Arthur, Neville and Wilfred. The 5 members of the younger family are Bernard, Aldwyn, Cuthbert, Avice and Vera. They started writing the budget in 1906, and as the siblings died, their children continued the habit. David, Arthur's son, wrote the last poignant letter in 1987. All the letters are now safely stored in the Bodleian Library. As I live in Australia, it means I don't often get to read the originals. Bernard, Arthur and Enid travel to Hallam Fields in Derbyshire for May and Edmund's wedding celebrations. The women wear fabulous hats. The working class locals are entranced by the wealthy visitors, and Edmund and Arthur set up booby traps in the parsonage. Cuthbert sets out the route for Berkhamsted cross-country run using bags of paper. Vera sits in the garden at Sydenham to write her letter, on a hot day in June, surrounded by furniture as the whole house is being spring cleaned. There is discussion about characters and graphology and who the expert handwriting analyser might be. Wilfred, working as a road builder, writes from Okanagan Falls in British Columbia, and Aldwyn, the Anglican missionary in Africa, writes from Kota Kota in Nyasaland, which is a town on the shores of Lake Malawi. Bernard's letter, Sydenham, May the 10th, 1908. Dear ones, in my last letter, I had the great joy of describing to you the International Ladies Hockey Match at Richmond. This time there is an event of even more importance, which I cannot pass over. I refer, of course, to Edmund and May's wedding. I arrived at Hallam Fields on the afternoon of Monday, May the 4th, having picked up Enid at Trent on the way. We were met at Trowell Station by 2 poor, worn-out wrecks who announced themselves to be Edmund and Arthur. They were suffering from headaches, bad throats, stomachaches, lumbago, rheumatism, etc. We none of us felt very keen on carrying all our luggage, so we borrowed the one porter. The station master asked him anxiously if he could be spared, and proceeded to the tram. Our appearance created quite a sensation. Enid, who wore a bright pale blue costume and black hat with ostrich feathers, being everywhere taken for the bride. On arriving at the house, we had lunch and then made a thorough inspection. Arthur was exceedingly anxious that we should inspect the rooms separately, and led Enid to the drawing room while trying to persuade me to go into the study. However, Enid got to the study first, but alas, the booby trap over the door didn't work. Arthur had prepared an elaborate booby trap, especially for me, as I am so seldom caught. He spent most of the afternoon in setting it again, and eventually got me, after the servant, Mary, had also sadly fallen a victim. I liked the house very much. It seems very well planned and comfortable. I think I liked the dining room best, but all the rooms are nice. The study is a very spacious one. There is a very good-sized hall, which always makes a house attractive, I think. May arrived for tea, bringing numerous presents for us to admire. We then walked down to Edmund's church, which is not beautiful outside, but is very nice inside. We had a sort of impromptu rehearsal of the wedding ceremony. Arthur and I, who shared the spare room, were awakened on the wedding morning at 6:30 by loud and repeated hammerings on the wall. We came to the conclusion that Edmund, who was next door, must be hanging up pictures, but the noise continued, and presently we heard Edmund's dulcet tones through the wall. I felt it my duty, as best man, to go and see if the bridegroom was all right, so I leapt gracefully out of bed and opened the door, against which several planks were supporting themselves. Enid's bedroom door was also decorated by a 12-foot plank, which fortunately did not kill her. Soon after 10, we all four set out in a closed carriage, and a shower of rain for Long Eaton. We passed several men standing at the roadside with bicycles upon nearing Long Eaton, and came to the conclusion that they were scouts. We arrived very early and called at the Borbanks first to drop the luggage. Edmund went into the house, while we sat still and tried to look dignified. There was quite a crowd staring at us through the windows of the carriage. Evidently, Enid and Arthur must be quite out of the common. Arriving at the church, Edmund and I went to the vestry, where we stayed till the last minute possible. When at last we went into the church, we found it packed full. However, the only thing that I noticed was some Church Lads' Brigade boys filing into a seat, and I also saw Mother, looking very imposing. I noticed her hat. I didn't see Enid, Arthur, or Cousin Ellen, but I am assured they were there. The choir arrived immediately with the bridal party, so Edmund and I lined up. May looked very nice, and so did her two sisters, who were bridesmaids. Enid and Arthur must describe the service, etc. Everything went off without a hitch. The luncheon afterwards was a great success. It was in a large marquee in the garden. The tables were very prettily decorated, and everything was very well managed. Canon Massey proposed the health of Edmund and May, to which Edmund responded. The happy pair soon afterwards left for Skegness for their honeymoon. Mother and Cousin Ellen then drove off to Spondon, and Enid and I went to the train station. We journeyed up together to St. Pancras. Enid insisted that we were taken for a newly married couple at Nottingham station, but I don't think so. I could write a lot more about the wedding, but I trust Enid and Arthur will describe what I have forgotten, and I expect Mother has done her duty nobly in her usual weekly letters, so you will have already heard a great deal about the happy day. Enid came here on Friday after visiting the aunts at Wimbledon. Yesterday afternoon, Vera, Enid and I went to see the admirable Crichton. I had seen it some weeks before with Cuthbert, but found it quite interesting to see again. It is a very good play, but I should like to see someone else in Crichton's part, also in Lady Mary's. We hope to go to another theatre before Enid leaves, also the Franco-British exhibition at White City. Cuthbert, Avice and I went for a walk on May the 1st. We began by missing the train at Sydenham, owing to Avice, and ended by missing a train back in the afternoon, in each case being just in time to see the train leave the station. The walk itself, however, was very nice. What a useful adjective this is, though nothing very exciting happened. I have come to the conclusion that fines in the budget are of no use. The missionary box regularly receives sixpenny fines, and the budget regularly dawdles its way around. I believe the only remedy for such delinquents is to leave out the offender altogether in the next round of the budget. I would be interested in hearing what others think. Arthur. A bird has commenced making a peculiarly irritating drilling noise in the next garden. Father says he thinks it is a nuthatch. This morning was the first time we heard it. We haven't succeeded in seeing it yet. Vera, in your case, I think I should have kissed the sleeping stranger and quickly retired. Avice, I think you give a very good account of Branscombe. I enjoyed our visit there immensely. I feel sure everybody will like it in the summer, despite the beach of shingle. Miss Dean is indeed a real character, but I think she will do. Enid, the characters are on the whole so good that I feel convinced that the graphologist must know us, by hearsay anyhow. Is it Francis Hen? I don't think mine is very good, but I don't suppose most people will approve of their own. My theory is that nobody knows anybody else's character. They only know what appears naturally. I am very glad that Cuthbert is cautious where the opposite sex are concerned. Fancy Edmund's character being still unformed at 38 years of age. May will certainly have a chance of moulding him. I hope, Enid, that you will send the Colonial Brothers' handwriting too, as I would greatly enjoy hearing what the graphologist deduces about our foreign brothers. I read The Woodlanders by Thomas Hardy, which was very good. I never think his aristocrats are well drawn. His peasants and middle-class characters are much better. A letter from Wilfred goes round with this budget. It is a fine one. I am too tired now to refer to it, but will do so when it comes back again. I read it directly it arrived, but it is rather a puzzle to find one's way about in it, as Wilfred does not believe in numbering his pages. Yours, Bernard. Notes on Bernard's letter. Train stations that don't exist any longer are interesting, as you can use online maps and look up where they used to be. In some cases, modern roads follow where the old track bed used to be. Trent Station was quite near Long Eaton, but was an interchange station between different railway lines, and it closed in 1968. The line that came in from Derby took the train in a long, tight curve as it entered the station, so the front carriages could see the rear carriages of the train, which was clearly both confusing and disconcerting. Sir Edmund Beckett, who was a QC, and first Baron Grimthorpe, described Trent Station in the early 1900s. You arrive at Trent. Where that is, I cannot tell. I suppose it is somewhere near the River Trent, but then the Trent is a very long river. You get out of the train to obtain refreshment, and having taken it, you endeavour to find your train and your carriage. But whether it is on this side or that, and whether it is going north or south, this way or that way, you cannot tell. Bewildered, you frantically rush into your carriage. The train moves off around a curve, and then you are horrified to see some red lights glaring in front of you, and you are in immediate expectation of a collision, when your fellow passenger calms your fears by telling you that they are only the tail lamps of your own train. Enid has travelled on the train from Liverpool, has changed trains at Trent Station and met Bernard, and they have travelled on to Trowell Station, which was a small station just to the east of Hallam Fields, and this station closed in 1967. Edmund and Arthur met their train. None of them want to carry the luggage, so they borrow the station porter to get the luggage to the tram. Trams, of course, also disappeared from there a long time ago. And the appearance of wealthy visitors caused a sensation in this working-class neighbourhood, which was adjacent to a huge industrial ironworks, belching smoke into the air. Bernard, no doubt, looked like a wealthy British gentleman, and Enid is wearing a bright blue costume and a black hat decorated with ostrich feathers, and the locals think she is the bride. Arthur has set up an elaborate booby trap over Edmund's study door, and he tries to get Bernard to walk into it and fails. And at 6:30 a.m. on the morning of his wedding, Edmund is busy banging, and he has a 12-foot plank of wood outside Enid's bedroom door setting another booby trap. Bernard remarks that Edmund fortunately did not kill Enid. What a mad family! Wilfred's letter. O'Canagan Falls, British Columbia, 19th of April 1908. Put in by Bernard. Dear Budget readers, I feel as if I had been getting the budget on false pretences lately, as I have not contributed a letter for so long. I have just remembered the margin, which I will now make for the sake of consistency, as I proposed it myself. The mark in the bottom left-hand corner is the trace of a broken pot of tomato jam. Soon after we had moved up here, John, my partner, i.e. companion, packed up a sack containing jam, cigarette papers, books and a few other trifles. It was a very dark night. He got off the trail somehow, fell into the creek twice, and the sack seemed to consist mostly of tomato jam when he arrived. This next stain is caused by a bug which has just arrived from the corner of the roof. But paper is far too precious to throw away, so you must make allowances. It looks nice, but it is so hard to write upon that I often take to a pencil, as I am doing now. Arthur, I see you are surprised that Morn, author of Portuguese East Africa quails before the insect creation. They are the chief drawback, to my mind, of all unsettled countries. Here, for instance, the mosquitoes, though only few in number, are particularly bloodthirsty, and the wood ticks are worse. I have to walk through a good bit of greasewood, which is a brush peculiar to the dry belt of North America, every day, and it is full of wood ticks. They are very fond of me, affection which I don't return. I would sooner meet rattlesnakes or cougars. Bernard, I suppose, after the style of all the great editors, you are already busy with the Xmas budget for 1908. May it be as good as the last. Enid, I should like to see the solution of your prize competition. I solved some 13 or 14 items, I think correctly, but 1 or 2 puzzled me exceedingly. Of course, as I have no access to an encyclopedia, I cannot solve any more. Edmund, I am as much puzzled as you were by the centrifugal pump. Surely this item ought to have appeared in the advertisements. Upon rereading the family limericks, I think I have solved the mystery. Was not Cyril the inventor? I have read the Xmas budget several times and am delighted with it. My brothers and sisters have produced a work that has provided me with great enjoyment. I must try and contribute something to the next one. This is a good opportunity to thank the family once more for the books they sent me at Christmas, which were all greatly appreciated, as I can only get old books out here. I expect you have all read most of them. In fact, Several of them I selected from budget reviews, and I have not been disappointed. Mrs. Waterman, who is a great reader, amused me greatly over the biography of Evelyn Wood's life. "Oh, Mr. Cox," she said, "I have finished the second volume. It is so interesting. Will you please lend me the third?" The second volume, of course, ends with Wood's experiences quite up to date. So, I suppose, the third volume, if it did exist, would deal with his future life. British Columbia, 1887, published by Macmillan, by Lees and Clutterbuck. This is not a new book, and may be out of print now, but any of you who get a chance should read it. It is a description of a hunting trip in the Kootenay district of British Columbia in 1887 by 3 Englishmen. It is exceedingly well told. Of course, British Columbia has been a good deal settled up since that date, but much of it holds good to this day. It is far above the average of hunting books. And finally, Campaign Pictures by A.G. Hales, Scenes from the Boer War, bombastic and not very accurate. This is a thrilling description of Lord Kensington's dashing ride and capture of some Boer town, Harrismith, I think, for which he was awarded the D.S.O. Oddly enough, I had the true story of this exploit from Captain Wilmot last year, which differs a great deal from the version described in this book. Wilmot and a few other officers had been left in the town on parole by the Boers till the English forces arrived. All the Boers had cleared out, as they were very hard pressed, and were captured a few days later. First, another party of Boers rode through for all they were worth, and seeing men in khaki wandering about, fired on them. Naturally, not having a gun among them, Wilmot and the rest bolted for cover, and luckily nobody was killed. A day or two afterwards, Lord Kensington and 1 or 2 men rode in and captured the town, which had not a single defender. I do find it amusing when people are decorated with trophies, like the Distinguished Service Order, for really not doing very much at all. I think some member of the family should interview our international hockey player and publish the result in the next budget. Vera, let me renew my congratulations to you. There is no prize offered for finding your way about the pages of this letter or deciphering my handwriting, though no doubt any of you who do so will think you have earned a prize. It is very curious the way budgets reach me. The one I am now returning started on its travels in June 1907 and reached me in February 1908. They do take a long time to arrive. I have sent them on, when necessary, quite promptly. Anyhow, I am out of the reach of 6-penny fines. You will have seen in the papers last fall about the trouble in Vancouver over Oriental immigration. I do not think it is by any means over. The Japanese government have given assurances before that there should be no more immigration, but it has gone on all the same. Chinese are now practically excluded by a $500 entrance tax. I think the same procedure, or perhaps absolute exclusion, will be necessary for all Orientals. Of course, on imperial grounds, it is a very delicate matter as regards Hindus. But I think Winston Churchill's idea of opening British East Africa is an excellent solution of the difficulty. But I do not expect any of you, except perhaps Neville, are interested in the question. Did any of you ever live in a house without a floor? I do not mean, of course, in a house floating in space, but with terra firma, for a floor. Our present cabin has no floor at present, and I find it has some advantages. No sweeping is necessary, only occasional raking. When wet, it can, unfortunately, become boggy. It is an excellent cabin otherwise. I attended a political meeting here the other day. It was rather like the organisation of a South African army. More generals than privates, as we elected a president, vice president, treasurer and secretary, though we did not number 10 people in the room altogether. Arthur, I am still wearing some of your second-hand British-made clothes of no value, which Avice kindly sent to me in the post. They have been very useful, though most of them have now reached the stage when I cannot appear in them in public any more. Cuthbert, just before I send off the old budget home, I see your argument about the athletic heats, which I never tried to solve before. How is this for a solution? I expect it is the same as Edmund's, and will indeed revive an old controversy. We used to have byes during my long ago days at Tunbridge School in the house cricket and footer competition on these lines. Your solutions has byes in another form, namely walkovers. Yours is the only possible solution if you retain the first two in each heat. But why should you? It is harder for a boy to get second in the final, the survival of the fittest, than in his heat. Your loving brother, Wilfred. Notes on Wilfred's letter. Jam and bugs were smeared on the paper, which was written in pencil in a primitive hut with an earthen floor. His letter was very hard for me to read. Wilfred had lovely handwriting when he had good paper and an ink pen, but this letter was a challenge, as several of his siblings also remarked upon. Okanagan Falls in British Columbia, in Canada, was an isolated place in the early 1900s, where Wilfred was working as a road builder. It is interesting that he says, in the book review describing an 1887 hunting trip, that British Columbia had a bigger population in 1908 compared to 1887. I'm sure Wilfred would not recognise the town of Okanagan Falls if he saw it today. And another book, like Winston Churchill's book, London to Ladysmith via Pretoria, which the siblings claim is a load of rubbish. It appears that Lord Kensington was awarded the Distinguished Service Order for safely capturing a town which had no rifles and so put up no defence whatsoever. The budget took a long time to reach the foreign brothers, and Wilfred is commenting on old news, such as Cuthbert's Berkhamsted athletic heats, which was described by Cuthbert in Season 1, Episode 10, Dear Vacabed. And the 1907 Christmas budget has safely arrived, and Wilfred has enjoyed reading it. In his hut, in the middle of nowhere, without an encyclopedia, he has managed to solve more of Enid's competition than myself and some friends were able to do. If you are on Twitter, please have a look at my post, where I put up Enid's 1907 General Knowledge Quiz, as I would love to know some more of the answers. And if you don't know what Vacabed means, it was the initial letters of some of the budgeteers: Vera, Arthur, Cuthbert, Avice, Bernard, Enid and Dorothy. Cuthbert's letter, Berkhamsted, May 18th, 1908. Dear Budget, I will begin by explaining to Vera and Enid that my remark, Vera, naughty, referred to the scrappy nature of her contribution to that budget. Vera usually writes such long, interesting letters. I'm afraid my remark was a little elliptical. I have just had the pleasure of a brief visit from Vera and Bernard to see the sports which had been postponed from last term. We fortunately had a fine afternoon, and a very good lot of performances were the result. Now that the lawsuit brought against the Board of Education's new scheme has been settled in our favour, we can begin to go ahead again in the matter of new buildings. The first, which will be started in the autumn, is going to be a new junior school. The present building will be pulled down to make room for new classrooms. There are 2 new boys in my form. One has been taken away from Charterhouse, owing to some quarrel, I think. He told Miss Robinson the other day that he had never had to work so hard in his life before, and I have been letting him down easily too. There was an increase of 12 this term, but I should not be surprised at a drop next term, as there is going to be a very big number of boys leaving. To go back to the end of last term, the day after I sent off the last budget, I and Scott laid the track for the cross-country run, which was cut down to 6 3/4 miles this year. Considering we were carrying bags of paper, we did it in the fairly good time of 47 minutes. The race was not such a good one as last year, as the winner came in nearly 3/4 of a mile ahead in 40 minutes and 30-odd seconds, which was a splendid time. Our gymnasium pair was 6th at the public schools competition at Aldershot this year. This is the best we have done so far. It will interest Edmund, if no one else, to hear that I went to see the final cup tie at the Crystal Palace these holidays. It really was a splendid match, such good football and so little fouling, both of which are the reverse of usual in finals. Father also went with Sandworth of St. Bart's the Great Smithfield and Rendell from the Church Times. We were all keen supporters of Wolverhampton. Just before I came back, I went with Avice and Vera to the academy. I had rather a hurried visit, but my impressions were that the landscapes as a whole were far better than usual, but the portraits, except Cope's, were far worse. Aldwyn will be interested to hear that Norman Wilkinson, of the schoolhouse, has 2 pictures in. One, a fine seascape. In the evening, I went with some fellow masters to see the Mikado. I can only say it was magnificent. Rutland Barrington's return makes such an enormous difference. Enid, if you want a new sensation, I should suggest that you submit any dirty fingerprints, such as that on page 1 of Vera's letter, to an expert. If genuine, your writing, reader, is a marvel. I should like to warn the family, before they get to Branscombe, not to be surprised if they find our landlady, Miss Dean, a reader of character. Avice spent her spare moments on our little visit in giving us away individually and collectively to Miss Dean. I fear she will now be expecting a crew of eccentrics, if not worse. Vera, if your problem with the sleeping stranger is a serious one, I should retire and summon a servant and explain the situation to her. Bernard's suggestion of kissing the stranger would do, of course, but we have not all got the same testimonial to our good looks as Bernard has lately been given. I still suffer from the Morning Post, but I can do no better, and I still mourn the sad loss of the Tribune. The Morning Post, at any rate, has a good literary or historical article by Hilaire Belloc once a week, and also a weekly interesting summary of American affairs. I have just begun to take an active part in politics, as I am now a member of the committee of the Liberal Association of this district, but I have not begun to speak yet. It is very good to have a letter from Wilfred in this budget, although it was a struggle to decipher. I am quite looking forward to Arthur's reaction to Wilfred's tale of wood ticks. Your devoted brother, Cuthbert.
Notes on Cuthbert's letter. The FA Cup final took place on the 15th of April 1908 between Wolverhampton Wanderers and Newcastle United, and it did indeed take place at Crystal Palace. I love doing fact-checking online and finding that the siblings' letters are absolutely correct. Wolverhampton won by 3-1. Cuthbert said it was excellent football with not many fouls. The Machel Cox family would have been happy as they were supporting Wolverhampton. Reverend Dr. Cox is also watching the match, along with 2 friends. Reverend Sandwith is the rector of St. Bartholomew the Great in Smithfield, and Rendell of the Church Times. I don't know if Rendell was the editor or just a journalist. I suspect the former. It's on my list to delve into the archives of the Church Times and find out exactly what was Dr. Cox's connection. I suspect he wrote articles for that newspaper. Rutland Barrington was a popular singer who regularly sang in Gilbert and Sullivan operas at the Savoy. There are some wonderful quotes about him on Wikipedia. Mr. Barrington is wonderful. He always manages to sing 1/16 of a tone flat. It's so like a vicar. Dear old Rutland scarcely ever did sing in tune, but how grand he was. He had a beautifully clear diction and a marvellous sense of timing, and was one of the finest singers of the popular topical songs that our stage ever knew. And the Times newspaper said, his strength lay in his quietness of voice and movement. No one could be so ridiculously pompous. There was a native drollery in his lightly rolling dance, a comic dignity in his rotund and placid yet twinklingly intelligent face. He always gave the impression of thoroughly enjoying whatever he did. In 1908, Mr. Barrington was once again playing Pooh Bah in The Mikado, which Cuthbert has been to see at the Savoy. It sounds like he was a great comic actor, and Cuthbert clearly agreed. And if you live anywhere near Berkhamsted, or you know the town, which is just north of London, in 1908 they were pulling down old classrooms and building a new junior school.
Arthur's letter, Garfield House, 20th of May, 1908. My dears, I am trying hard to live up to my writing, as so kindly interpreted by Francis Hen, but really the furious temper that I apparently have so startles Avice when I give it play that I shall have to reserve it for special occasions. I went and bawled at her just now because the ink pot was empty, and she nearly had a fit. I observe that I am the only one of the 7 in regard to whose sex the graphologist is in no doubt. If Edmund had my intuitive perception, he would be able to supply the intervening letters of some of the more elliptical words in my letters. I do like the bit about Vera, who excels in some outdoor pursuit, but not sure which. A nice touch. As a matter of fact, hockey is by no means her one accomplishment. Whatever the means of divination, the results of our characters, on the whole, are surprisingly good. I expect none of the foreign brothers will prove to have formed characters either. As to Wilfred's very interesting letter in this budget, is it sheer cussedness that makes him so regardless of the natural sequence of the pages? I assure him I do not wonder at anyone who quails before a beetle. Any cold-blooded creature gives me fits, especially toads, frogs, beetles, cockchafers, earwigs, woodlice, snakes and worms. Wilfred's descriptions of the wood ticks quite makes me tremble. By the way, Enid, do you remember at Preston, in the days of Christopher's infancy, how he was seen in the park, trampling on a worm in a business-like way, announcing, "Baby, kill this little thing, it run after baby"? It always falls to Bernard's lot to chronicle the really big events, and he certainly is an admirable reporter. He gets there every time. Edmund's dulcet tones. I leapt gracefully out of bed, and so on. He describes things very well. Really, I have little or nothing to add. I thought Enid seemed years younger than any of us. You none of you would believe the trouble those booby traps cost us. Edmund and I had one most successful rehearsal before Burr and Enid arrived, when the servant Mary was bringing in 2 glasses of milk for us. Of course, it was no good crying over spilt milk, but I fear both Edmund and I did so. It was really rather trying, when I had visited Edmund on purpose to show there was no ill feeling, like King Edward and the Kaiser, not to be able to conceal the fact that I felt very ill indeed. As for Edmund, he seemed to be quite as sick when I arrived. However, we parted, I hope, without any ill will, if without a goodbye. I had thoughts of attending the wedding incognito as the Duke of Lancaster, but Edmund would not hear of it. It was really very gratifying the way the populace turned out to give me a welcome, and Edmund saved me all fatigue by bowing right and left for me as we drove through the streets in our carriage. Bernard, best man by courtesy, looked extremely nice and self-possessed. I say this on the understanding that he is not vain. As the same, i.e. not vain, cannot be said presumably about Edmund, I will not tell you how he bore himself. I think he ought to have been proud of his bride, and doubtless he was. After the ceremony, while the others crowded into the vestry, I sat tight and whispered soft nothings, really, into Cousin Ellen's sympathetic ear. Then I escorted Mother, who looked splendid, and Cousin Ellen and Enid to their carriage, to the strains of "Coming Through the Rice," and there we parted. For a few minutes I paraded the streets, expecting to be noticed by every eye, but I had no wedding garments, and no one even recognised me as Edmund's brother. If they observed me at all, I think they took me for a reporter or a detective. My pen is really such an atrocious one that my character is getting sadly demoralised. I fear I will stop and take no further risks. May 24th. Another story of Christopher occurred to my mind in church this morning, from studying the clothes of a person in front of me. The other day I was wearing a dearly beloved, but alack moribund, pair of knickerbockers, made in the style with the seams doubled over outside. Please excuse my ignorance of sartorial details. Christopher, after quietly studying my appearance for some minutes, could stand it no longer, and said to me in a confidential way, "Father, I don't think you know it, but you have put on your trousers inside out." Of course, after the brown boot episode, it would hardly have been surprising if I had done so. Enid, I cannot say that I share your enjoyment of a big crowd, but I believe I am the only member of the family that really abominates it. Moreover, I would not be on the telephone for anything. I really feel there is no need. I like the story about Hazel and Aaron's calf very much. Vera, I am glad to see that Cuthbert's remark, "Vera, naughty," had nothing to do with his friend Mr. Rawes. You appear to have had misgivings on this point yourself. I am anxious to hear what you had in your mind in stating your hypothetical case about an interview under difficulties, and what your own solution is. I was, as perhaps you know, in my beauty sleep, not to be trifled with, when Mr. Woolcombe, our lawyer, first paid me a formal visit one evening, and the servant showed him in and shut the door on us. To this day I have not an idea what his procedure was, or what I said or did before I came to myself, but I muddled through in the end. Mother is coming here tomorrow for a fortnight. I had meant to keep the budget to write my impressions after seeing her, but if I do, I shall probably exceed my week. I gather that Edmund has offended once more, but as a new list has been started, I am not sure about the date. If so, I am altogether in favour of the extreme penalty this time, but probably Vera will not accept the invidious responsibility of leaving him out. If by any chance I offend, I shall, as I threatened before, tear up the budget if it comes to me on its next round. Only once has it reached me in the holidays, and it ought not to next holidays. Bernard, I'm interested to hear of the bird next door, but to describe the noise as peculiarly irritating shows a remarkably unintelligent state of mind. Peculiarly exciting, I could understand. I doubt very much it is a nuthatch. Possibly it might be a lesser woodpecker, which is not at all easy to detect. I wish I could watch it. You must tell me more. I read The Golden Horseshoe by Robert Aikin, which is a nightmare of adventures in South America. One breathless escape follows so closely on another that one is fairly asphyxiated by the end of the book. I meant to have reported on Mother's appearance and general deportment, and so kept this letter until the 7th day. But now I find there is no time to devote to this interesting topic. We are expediting today, if fine enough. Christopher last night asked Avice when she would be going out to a garden party again. He was meaning a dinner party. She in her ferns, and father in his Etons. Avice, I should explain, went out to dinner last time clothed partially in maidenhair ferns by way of decoration. Tout à vous tout. Is this French? Arthur.
Notes on Arthur's letter. Arthur was devoted to bird watching, and he would spend hours watching and waiting. So it's fascinating that he couldn't stand bugs and beetles, and he trembles at Wilfred's story of Canadian ticks. Sadly for us, Arthur does not explain exactly what sort of booby traps that he and Edmund so enjoyed setting up in the parsonage in Hallam Fields. It was clearly something over the door. The poor servant girl, Mary, walked into it unawares and spilled milk all over the floor, which amused Edmund and Arthur. The wedding in Long Eaton was clearly a grand affair, and it's interesting to read between the lines. Mother, cousin Ellen of Spondon Hall, and Enid are all wearing huge grand hats. Enid's is decorated with ostrich feathers, which would have been a very ostentatious statement of wealth. To the working-class locals, Edmund's wealthy family are a spectacle. The wedding party are inside a covered carriage, rather than the more usual open-top horse and cart, and the locals are staring at the wealthy visitors through the windows of the carriage. Arthur doesn't have wedding clothes, which I imagine means he's not wearing a morning suit and a top hat, like the other gentlemen are, and he thinks he's gone unnoticed by the locals. It's all very easy to imagine. The 1911 census puts the Borbank family at 19 College Street in Long Eaton, which is interesting as the garden doesn't look big enough for the marquee for the wedding breakfast. I have one old faded photo of the marquee, and it looks like maybe 50 people sat down for the meal. As Edmund was Anglican clergy, and this was clearly a middle-class wedding taking place in a working-class neighbourhood, I wonder if the marquee was put up in the garden of the vicarage in Long Eaton. I have a feeling that the wedding might have taken place at St Lawrence's Anglican Church in Long Eaton, but annoyingly no one mentions the name of the church in their descriptions of the wedding in these letters. And two other interesting things. Years ago, at least in England, wedding guests used to celebrate by throwing rice over the newly married couple. Arthur is escorting Mother, Enid and cousin Ellen to their carriage, whilst musicians play Coming Through the Rice. For once, Arthur's handwriting is quite tidy in this letter, so I'm sure that this is the correct title, but I cannot find any reference to this piece of music. Has anyone ever heard of it before? If you have, please get in touch with me on Twitter or by email. and Mother has come to visit Garfield House, and so they are expediting today. Not a word I regularly use. Arthur means they are planning an expedition and they're going out for the day. All very jolly hockey sticks. Vera's letter, Sydenham, June the 1st, 1908.
Dear family, a boiling hot day, the whole house upside down with spring cleaning, and I am reduced to writing out of doors on the lawn, surrounded by carpets, curtains, cushions, mats, etc., the only bright spot being myself, a picture of beauty, in a light blue cotton frock and Liberty Panama hat, lying back in a deck chair. This sounds comfortable, but is not. The neck of my dress is too tight. My shoes are wet from walking across the grass. A selection of ants and midges are crawling all over me, and to crown all, I am vainly endeavouring to write, with a blotting pad on my knee. I have been quite dissipated of late, going out most days in order to get out of the way of the spring cleaning. On Saturday, Bernard took me to the military tournament, and we both enjoyed it enormously. I think I would sooner see that than almost anything. Each item is intensely interesting, and there is no waiting. Everything goes without any hitch or delay, which shows how well the whole thing is organised. It is so interesting to think that what you see is no specially trained performance got up for the occasion, but just the outcome of the ordinary training of the British soldier and sailor. In one event, you see the result of soldiers who have been training for riding masters and have just returned from a special 6 months in which they have had an utterly unbroken 4-year-old horse to train. We saw 6 of them, each with the identical horse they had been training. Quite a splendid exhibition. They can practically do anything and everything with them. They jump gates 5 foot high without stirrups or reins, just with their arms folded. They make the horses do it by themselves, etc. And it is very pretty to see how the horses turn their heads to their riders directly they have finished doing something, to get the bit of sugar which is invariably forthcoming. Yesterday was a glorious day, and Bernard and I went for a 33-mile bicycle ride, which we thoroughly enjoyed. Unfortunately, we met a fair number of people coming back, who would probably be shocked at us riding on Sunday. I wanted to hang a little label out. We are going to church this evening. I often want to have a little label printed. I don't play hockey in the summer, and I can talk on other subjects. I am going to meet Bernard in town this evening, and we are going to dine at the Franco-British exhibition and see the illuminations and the fireworks. We are meeting Cuthbert and Scott there, so it will be rather fun, I expect. I have just finished off the index for Father's book on Chelmsford, and have been doing various illustrations for another book he is writing on the church for Batsford. Cuthbert, I wonder if you have seen the 2nd volume of the Victoria County History of Hertfordshire. It has a long account of Berkhamsted School in it, which is really rather interesting. I was extremely interested in the handwriting characters and feel rather flattered with mine, though there is a nasty sound about desires to please, to which might be added and does not succeed. I note that both Bernard and I are firm, not obstinate. I see that Arthur has intuitive perception and Cuthbert good intuition. What is the difference? Perhaps the last word, in the case of Cuthbert, should have been written as 2 words. Does Cuthbert have good intuition, or is he good in tuition? A letter from Aldwyn has just come for the budget, a very welcome addition, especially as there is one from Wilfred too. Neville certainly owes another. With regard to keeping the budget over time, I am sure the only remedy is to leave the offender out next round. I should most certainly have left Edmund out this time, and shall do so if it occurs again, but I thought he really ought to see the accounts of the wedding. There is such a lot more that I meant to write, academy, books, etc., but really I'm so meltingly hot that I can't write it all. My problem about the sleeping stranger really came out of a book Bernard was reading. I could not think how to end my letter, and I thought it would be a good finish. It is rather amusing to see what everyone has put. In the book, the lady retires in alarm and leaves the house, finally coming back again. Arthur, I love your Christopher stories. The wedding accounts are all very interesting. Yours, Vera.
Notes on Vera's letter. The 1908 Franco-British exhibition was an enormous public fair at White City in West London, and the stadium next door hosted the 1908 Olympic Games, of which more in future budget letters. Both were huge occasions, and a large percentage of Londoners visited one or both. I will tell you more about the exhibition in the next podcast, but if you're interested, have a look online. Aldwyn's letter, Kota Kota, Nyasaland, March 29th, 1908. Letter put in by Vera.
Dear budgeteers, I fear I have treated you very badly of late, but I take up my pen again, at last as a kind of Lenten penance. Moreover, the Christmas budget was of such exceeding merit that it seemed to dry up in my brain any lingering literary longing that may have been left there by the scorching suns of Africa. I quite hope to be home for next Christmas. It will be my first Christmas at home since my ordination. I expect I shall leave here sometime in August and arrive home sometime in October. But nothing is fixed yet. One has to book one's passage very early by the German East African line, or else one may be left behind at Chindi. I have written to our treasurer at Fort Johnston at the south of the lake to ask him to book my passage, but of course my plans are pretty dependent on others. I am pretty busy this Lent. I have baptism classes 3 times a week, also an instruction class for our older Christians, and preaching in the village to the heathen and the Mohammedans. The marriage tie here is most appallingly lax, even when there is what the natives recognize as a proper marriage. It is one of our chief obstacles in missionary work, and hits at the root of all purity. The more one sees of it at close quarters, the more one regrets any slackening of the marriage tie in England. I wonder what a husband would think at home if he one day received a perfectly innocent-looking hen, value 2d, and then found that it was a sign that his wife's people wanted the marriage to be off. Things get a little complicated when the couple happen to be Christians. They, of course, know that they are married for good and all, but their heathen relatives by no means realize this. Then again, if a man dies, his relatives, generally his brother, inherits his wife or wives. This again causes complications when the wife is a Christian. If she refuses, she is very likely left stranded. We have a horror of interfering unnecessarily with native customs, especially in the question of marriage. But the time comes when it is Christianity or heathenism, and then one must step in. I should think There is hardly ever a week goes by without some marriage question being brought to me, and sometimes much more frequently. Of course, the low idea of women, even among the Christians, is responsible for many of the difficulties. I think you would have laughed today if you had heard the young Christian man who came in to see me today. He had a long tale of woe. His wife wouldn't sweep the house, wouldn't carry the water, and wouldn't cook. I asked him what he had been doing to her. He said it was all umbunga, which means pride, on her part. Of course, not cooking was the greatest crime, and he asked me if I had a cook who wouldn't do his work, didn't I chuck him out? I had to point out that a wife was a little more than a cook. I am rereading 41 Years in India by Field Marshal Lord Roberts. I find it intensely interesting. I started it instead of reading novels during Lent, and I feel rather a fraud. April the 1st. This letter may linger on for days, as I am so busy this Lent. I will send it off in the post. With much love to all, your brother Aldwyn.
I'm recording this on the 19th of December in Brisbane, Australia, on a hot and steamy summer day, and it looks like another tropical rainstorm might be on the way. I wanted to say how much I'm enjoying reading these mad, peculiar letters written by my great-grandfather and his siblings. I started in June 2020 after a suggestion by a friend. Thanks, Marty. And my aim was to provide something a bit different and hopefully entertaining. There are now people listening to this podcast in 22 countries around the world, and I hope these historical letters are providing a bit of escapism for you, or a distraction from the difficult situations that I'm sure many of you are currently enduring. Here in Queensland, life is more normal than in other countries due to our closed international borders and the fact that our state borders have been closed for most of the year. I would love to know where you're listening from and how you first heard about my podcast. If you fancy telling me, please send me an email, machelcoxletters@gmail.com. I will also be putting up some more photos on Twitter in the next couple of weeks. There's a great one that Edmund drew. Check out @CoxLetters on Twitter. And I'm sorry for the terrible accents. People asked me to give each sibling an accent, to give them different personalities. I will try and improve. I'm going to have a bit of a break over Christmas, and then I'll be back in the new year with more episodes. There are some shocking skeletons in the closet that I haven't rattled yet. In the next episode of 100 Years of Cox, it is June 1908. Edmund's letter is mournful, as he knows his siblings are going to miss him out of the next round of the budget due to his regular delinquency. As Bernard says, sixpenny fines don't work. Edmund draws a sketch of himself hanging on the gallows, with his siblings standing round making comments. "Let me be a warning to you all," says Edmund. Check out his drawing on Twitter. Avice is exhausted, with exams on and an at-home day at Garfield House School. Enid Street is being renamed and renumbered. Her house in Liverpool was formerly known as 187 Lodge Lane, but will now be known as 27 Sefton Park Road. Enid also describes more of Edmund's wedding, although Edmund, having been left out of the next budget, won't be reading it. Bernard and Vera have been on a bicycling expedition, and they describe it in great detail. And the Franco-British exhibition, which was adjacent to the 1908 London Olympic Stadium at White City in London, is described, including a wonderful fairground ride called the Flip Flap. There are photos of it online. And then I'm going to read some more letters written by Matilda Machell, my third great-grandma, with fascinating descriptions of her life in London in the 1820s. 100 Years of Cox, the Machell Cox Budget Letters, and all content is subject to copyright and belongs to both myself and the Bodleian Library in Oxford. You have been listening to 100 Years of Cox. Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and thank you for listening.